This is the first of what I hope to be a series of many conversations with interesting people who I happen to cross paths with. And my intention here is a little different than the podcast. I hope for these conversations to be less like an interview and more like a back and forth dialogos. Today, I'm actually with Adam Unger, and Adam reached out. He found me through my podcast and reached out to me. And he has actually a really fascinating story. We actually hopped on a call. I think it was like a month or two back, and we spoke for like 2 hours. And I actually wanted to record it because I had a feeling it was going to be like an epic conversation, and it was. So here we are again, and this time I did press the record button. And yeah, Adam, I would just love it if you kind of shared your story from just kind of what you told me about your life and kind of the trajectory of your life and where you are now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll do as best as I can to give an accurate one, because stories can be self-constructed. But you know, I guess growing up, right? I grew up in New York. I was a good baseball player when I was a kid, and since I was basically 5 years old up until the time through high school, all I wanted to do was become a professional baseball player and play for the Yankees. And that was pretty much the focus of my childhood, and teenage young adult years. And it definitely affected me a lot, because when you're trying to be an athlete that's that good, you got to introspect quite a bit. I'll come back to that later in the story. But I ended up getting drafted by the Yankees my senior year of high school. So that dream came true for me, and I ended up deciding to not go to college and to just go play for the Yankees, because I just couldn't turn I just couldn't turn that down. I mean, I kind of knew maybe the chances of me making it to the major leagues were not that great. And I was just like, I got to play for the Yankees. I can't turn it down. So I ended up playing for the Yankees. Did a season with the Yankees. Struggled a bit trying to figure out how to play professional baseball. There's a big difference. You got guys up here in New York. They're throwing 80 miles an hour or whatever, and then you jump to playing for the Yankees as an 18-year-old, and guys are throwing like 95, 100. The talent's just insane, and you don't realize how young you are at the time, to kind of handle all that pressure, and the responsibility of trying to really have a huge big time career at that young of an age. But I ended up at getting traded from the Yankees to the Rockies because I wasn't doing that well. But when I was with the Rockies, the Colorado Rockies, another professional team, I
So hold on, I'm sorry to interject. So
sure.
you got drafted on the minor league, right? You got
That's
drafted on.
that's
Okay,
right. So anyone that gets drafted in baseball is going to go to the minor leagues first, and then you've got to sort of work your way up. Single A, double A, triple A, major leagues.
okay,
So
okay.
I was in the minor leagues, um, and then I went over, as I said, the Colorado Rockies, and kind of figured things out and started to play better. Was with them for a season, and then I got released, which means basically got fired. Um, so that was a pretty crazy experience for me, just at that age. All of a sudden, you're 20 years old and you're like, I'm going to be this baseball player, and then all of a sudden it's like the rug just gets kind of pulled out from your identity, um, and so I from there I actually ended up going back to college, just to make kind of a long story short, because I don't want to get too long with it, but went back to college, majored in psychology, got into singing opera actually, and then started my next sort of foray into opera singing, which I pursued for a while. Um, Again, after college, because people commented on my deep deep voice. Even when I was playing professional baseball, people would tell me you should sing and not play baseball. So I don't know. I figured I'd give it a shot. And then, for various reasons, when I was in my 26, I wasn't making a ton of money as an opera singer, which is not too uncommon, and kind of had a little bit of panic about that, and then decided, all right, I'll become a lawyer. So I went and I went to law school, and I had I did well over at Hofstra University, which is over here on Long Island. I ended up transferring to University of Pennsylvania, and then I started working in a big law firm uh, in New York City, Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, and that was quite an experience because they work. I mean, they work hard over there. I mean, one time I stayed up for 36 hours straight, I think. I mean, it's really very, very intense. And kind of what happened to me is, I always had a little bit of I think a spiritual bent of like, as I was going through all these different phases of my life and trying to kind of figure things out, and, realizing that no matter what I accomplished, nothing satisfied me, talk about one of the truths of the Four Noble Truths. Um, and I kind of hit this like crisis as a lawyer where I realized that, I had just been kind of doing this to look good or to try to have a certain lifestyle. And I kind of remember sitting there one day and thinking to myself, like, I'm going to sit behind this computer my whole life and then I'm going to die. And it really started hitting me. And actually, my friends, a couple of weeks ago, we were out to dinner, and they were like, "Man, yeah, you had a real existential crisis. You like went from going to wanting to become partner at the law firm to like having a full blown like, what's the point of life and who am I and what am I?" I didn't even realize that really happened. Um, so I ended up changing jobs, trying to figure out what's going on. I was suffering quite a bit at the time. I started to rely on a lot of uppers and Adderall and even cocaine to actually keep me going working. Sitting behind my desk and pummeling out these documents and these long hours, and I wasn't enjoying it, and I didn't know what to do. And I ended up becoming really good friends with a guy who's from Norway, and we started actually talking like this over FaceTime. And I just started kind of just spilling my guts to him and telling him like all this stuff, and we started to get into like conversations about God and the purpose of life, and all this stuff, things that I was always struggling with in the background as well. And he was like, listen, you should read this book called The Book of Not Knowing by Peter Ralston. And I got the book and I read it, and I was just, first of all, I was into it because like it was like always stuff that I had been thinking about, and I'd never gotten it quite like that, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And he suggested I started meditating. I tried meditating. I didn't know. I started with the Sam Harris app, like waking up. And I remember doing meditations, trying to do it 10 minutes a day. I couldn't do it at all. And I remember when Sam Harris is like, look for the one that's looking, and I'd be like, what the fuck is he talking about? Like, look for the one that's looking. I didn't get it. It made no sense to me whatsoever. It was incredibly frustrating, and but kind of the breaking point for me actually is, and this can get our trip into psychedelics, is, I was, after reading the Peter Ralston book, and I was kind of, thinking about, I had these things in like the back of my head, after doing all this meditation. And one time, I microdosed LSD. And this was kind of the experience that shifted everything. It wasn't a lot, it was like a very little bit, And I remember I was sitting there in a backyard, and a fly landed on my arm. And I think I was so still from microdosing this thing, that the fly just stayed on my arm for an hour. And I was literally just fixated watching the fly. And then I remember I did this for a very, very long time. And I laid back on my back, and all of a sudden it was like a blue sky day. And it was like, all of a sudden it felt like I was literally leaving the earth and flying through the air, you know? And it got so real that I actually snapped myself out of it, because I thought that I was literally gonna like shoot into outer space and not come back. You know, I got scared. And when I came back, something like kind of snapped in me. And I remember like looking at my hands and looking at my body as if it were like the first time I was ever looking at it. You know, being like, oh, and then I sort of like got like, it kind of clicked for me, like, oh, like this is actually what they're talking about, this like meditation, contemplation stuff. Like it really clicked, like, oh, like there's a whole realm of like of possibility, you know, that I wasn't even aware of in my other, in my previous level of consciousness or level of awareness. And that's when it really clicked for me. And like everything else, I kind of went full bore into it. I mean, I took a step back on being a lawyer. I actually quit and took a job that was a lot easier. I started to get more honest, you know, and took a job that was didn't require me to work so many hours. And I just went full steam into this stuff, into this work. And I started reading books. I read Daniel Ingram's book, even though at the time I didn't really, when I first started, I didn't understand it. And then I read it again a year later, and I did. You know, read all of Peter Rawson's stuff, read, you know, do it like all the podcasts now that are available on the internet, you know, like Michael Taft, and I'm losing track of names now, but you know, Ajahn Brahm, or you know, just the cast of characters that one can listen to. And really, honestly, I was very lucky, because as it turned out, my friend from Norway was a highly experienced practitioner. And I was lucky that I was able to, you know, talk with him. We'd have like these long, like 2-hour talks almost every day, you know, where he'd be like, yeah, you know, distance is created by you and space doesn't exist. And I'd be like, what the fuck? You know, but the thing is I would try always to be like, okay, you know, how is he seeing the world such that that's real for him, you know, and really being open about it. And it just changed my life. Like the whole these last couple of years, really since like October 2020. So maybe not even 2 years, like a year and a half. And yeah, so I mean, that's where I'm at now. Obviously, still continuing, you know, my journey in both, you know, spirituality and life itself, which actually should be kind of one and the same movement. But yeah, I mean, this stuff obviously is pretty incredible. It's had a huge impact on me, and that's how I kind of ran into you on the internet, listening to your podcasts. And I think it was the one with Susan Cook Reuter that I had first listened to. So there you go. I mean, there's my story. Basically.
Yeah, that is really you already told me a lot of this. There was some extra details you put in here, but like I was listening to it, like I was hearing it the first time,
Yeah.
like really intrigued. And there's a couple of things that you mentioned, and there's a couple of things I want to talk about.
Sure.
But two things that kind of popped up was, well, first of all, you become a Yankee at 18 years old, getting drafted to the minor leagues, and like that being your dream and actually like making it happen, it materializing it, and then kind of dissolving. And that to me is fascinating because I guess for me, there's some parallels and similarities in the sense of like my dream was to be a successful rapper. That was my kind of thing.
Yep.
So for a while, like I kind of lived the typical life, just partying, hanging out, and going to school, going to college, and like finishing. And in that time, I was always like writing and recording. Like I've been interested with rap since I was like 12 years old, and I was always like writing and recording since a young age. Never really took it like serious, but once I finished college, I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life. Like I still didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna just go all in on this. And I kind of did that like fairly seriously for maybe 3 or 4 years. Like when I really started like shooting videos, doing shows, going to professional recording studios, and I had a blast. It was that period of my life was a blast, but ultimately like life pressures kind of, you know, came in with, I had my girlfriend at the time. She's my wife now, but at the time there was like the pressure of that and the pressure of making money. And I was just kind of just putting everything into music. And once again, it's just a difficult thing to really make money off of. And like my whole identity was wrapped in being a rapper. So when I was like, I have to try something else, that was just like dying. It was literally like an ego death. Like I just going back to that time, I remember it was just like I used to listen to music all the time in the car. Like I always would listen to rap. And I remember at that time, I just stopped listening to everything. And I would literally drive in silence for hours. Like I never would put on anything for like probably for 6 months until my friend introduced me to a podcast app. And then I started listening to podcasts. But for like a good 6 months, I didn't listen to anything. So I just know for me, that was like it was like an existential crisis. So I'm just curious, like, it seems like you went through several of those, with pursuing being a Yankee and then doing the opera singing, which is also very like out there, like, wow. And then, doing the lawyer thing and then realizing that's not for you. So I'm curious about that, like how that process was for you. And I'm wondering like how maybe that brought you into the spirituality, is like going through those kind of highs and lows. It's like, and like thinking, oh, I'm a Yankee, like this is who I am, or I'm an opera singer, or like I'm a big shot lawyer, and then like all three of those dissolving, and then like who am I?
Right. Well, I mean, I think I'm a pretty big fan of Krishnamurti. I've listened to a lot of his talks, and the one thing he said is like, it's very easy to kind of, I think, have meditation is not, and spirituality is not something that's sort of part of your everyday life, But it's like when you listen to him do these talks, he'll say something like, look at your everyday life, look at sort of the nature of that, of what's going on there, And I've kind of taken that approach always. And I think these things that we're talking about here can really teach us a lot, not just about ourselves, but about of like, when you start looking into it, like what's really going on here, and how does this have to do with, self and life and reality and everything. I think these things actually go quite deep because they go out of our very primal drives for like identity, security, um, fitting in, like what that means to me, all this sort of stuff that kind of, if you really start to deconstruct, it gets very interesting. And what I'll say about the Yankee thing is I remember sitting, in my hotel room where we were staying after I got released. And I remember sitting there and I was shocked because like I wasn't that upset. It's like literally, this is all I've been doing since I'm 5. I mean, 5. Some of my first memories, are of me being like, I'm gonna be a professional baseball player, You know, that's some of my earliest memories. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, I don't have to play baseball tomorrow. And there was this like weird sense of freedom with that. You know, it's like I had just had my dream like crushed, you know, and there was this like weird sense of freedom. Like, I don't have to do this tomorrow, you know? It's like I could have gone nuts and got upset about it, but I kind of didn't. I kind of was like, I'm free, you know, like that's not who I am, you know? And I think that's actually affected me a lot um, with every career I've had subsequently, having that experience so early on in my life of accomplishing something that, you know, playing for the Yankees is like, you know, the dream of the American little boy, you know, and having kind of gotten a taste of that, realized it didn't make me happy because once I was there, you know, then I'd have a bad game and I'd be pissed off, or I'd be worried about staying there. You know, once you get there, it's like, well, now the happiness of getting there is over. Now I have to stay here. So it's like it's a constant actual, if you look into it, there's suffering there. You know, like I've got to stay here. I've got to hit the competition away. I've got to stay here so I can be this Yankee guy, you know, and there's a lot of pressure, especially if you're doing it for maybe some wrong reasons or maybe some unconscious reasons, which was probably true of me at the time. And yeah, I mean, that was, to wrap up, like that was big for me. And I think that it did have spiritual implications for me later on, and taught me a lot of lessons. Um, you know, I mean, you could say also, I look, maybe I quit too soon. You know, maybe I could have kept trying. You know, but I remember actually one thing I saw. Maybe this is wrong, but I'm just being honest. Is, you know, I would see guys when I was younger who were like 25, 26, and for baseball that's old. 20, if you haven't made it to the major leagues yet, 25, 26 is kind of old. And you know, they'd still be playing in these leagues and trying to chase the dream, you know. And I'd kind of look at them and I'd be like, I don't know, maybe I was 15 and I kind of knew like, you're not going to get there, it's over. You know, I didn't tell them that, but I knew. And I think for whatever reason, I didn't want to ever be that, where it's like I was like stuck and always trying to be this baseball player. You know, so at the time, I think I kind of realized like, all right, I'm probably not going to make it. Like I can keep, I did try to keep playing for a little while afterwards. But it was hard. It felt like I climbed Mount Everest, you know, I got shot back down, and it was kind of like I was at peace with it, um, with at least that aspect. But I hope that answers your question. But um, you know, there's a lot to go into there. I think you had probably a similar experience with you know, with rap, with your career, with music. I did with music as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like the way you experienced that the solution was like, oh, this is freedom. And I wonder if for me it was also like some kind of a freedom, but I was like wasn't perceiving it that way. I was perceiving it as like some kind of groundlessness, like there's nowhere to stand, like who am I, what do I do, I'm lost. That like that's how my experience was. But thinking back to like doing music and being on the rap scene and in that world, like there was so much suffering. I was suffering a lot, you know, because um there would be times where it's like things were kind of going my way and like the creativity was flowing and I felt like I was making good music. And there was times where I just couldn't come up with it, which is normal, right? Like I'm sure this happens to everybody. It's just, but I would have so much suffering. I'd be like, I would literally cry. I'd be like, oh my God, like I'm not seeing as much, you know, like I'm not seeing as much recognition as I want. The music's not good enough or something, or I can't come up with anything right now. Um, So there was like a lot of suffering in that process, and there was suffering in when it was like letting go of that. And yeah, it's just like that was the other thing that I wanted to talk about is the suffering and the recognition of like all the striving that we do. um this is the first noble truth: life is suffering. And whenever I speak about this to my friends, um and several different people, there's usually a lot of resistance to that, to life is suffering. It's like what do you mean life is suffering? Like, oh, I love, like, I enjoy my life is great, like I'm happy. And maybe the way that it's phrased is problematic, because it's like, oh, life is not just suffering. But I think there is something there that it's like, well, there's actually this satisfaction with everything, as long as there's an ego, as long as there's a you, as long as there's some kind of striving or a sense of a doer. There's always this little subtle anxiety that's in the back, and it's so subtle, and it's so like we're so skilled at hiding it, and like, oh, I'm happy, everything's good, that I truly believe like most people just don't, like, it's truly unconscious, like they don't recognize it, they don't see it. And my experience is like the beginning of a spiritual path is actually that recognition of, oh, I'm fucking suffering, and there's a lot of suffering, and like everything that I'm trying to do is leading, like even the good things, the things like when I'm winning, like you said, when I'm on top, it's like I'm trying to keep it here. It's like if I made a lot of money, well, now I'm worried that I might lose it. Like there's always this sense of gain and loss. And yeah, like I'm curious, like if you feel like there was something there that shifted for you, that like you recognize, oh, there is actually a lot of suffering. Because like I'm always curious about that, and it's a weird thing to talk to about people, because I never want to like impose and tell people like life is suffering, because then it makes it seem like it's like it's almost like a dark or negative framing, and people naturally resist it. But it's like, if you really pay attention to your experience, how is that not the case?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to speak for everybody else. I kind of envy some people that are maybe completely blissful and
Never suffer, right? I
just
don't
happy
believe
with
I
their
don't believe those people.
just happy with their lives and all that stuff. I mean, I I think yes. I think that there was a recognition of that. I mean, I don't know. I was always kind of a kid that was focused on dying. I remember, when I was younger, I used to whenever I was close to my grandparents, and I would hug my grandmother goodbye. I would think I was probably 11 years old or something like that. And I think my grandmother said to my mom, like, he hugs me like he's not going to see me ever again, you know? And she was right. I was hugging her like I would never see her again, you know? And for whatever reason, I think that was always a part of things for me. And the way I grew up, my dad, one of the first books my dad ever read me when I was a kid is The Little Engine That Could. I don't know if you've heard of that book. It's a
Of
children's
course,
book.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. So I was always kind of like grew up on that, like, hey, you can do it. You can accomplish it. You can play for the Yankees. Do you know what? You know how much I get made fun of in my in Great Neck, New York, a Jewish kid from Long Island. With all my peers, like, I'm gonna play for the Yankees. Oh, there's Adam. He's got a batting cage in his backyard. He's fucking nuts. Like the the what that does to you, as a kid, because you're trying to fit in also. Um, but yeah, like, I think a lot of it goes to, at least for me, is trying to substantiate myself through this. Like, oh, if I could just get this and get to the other end of the rainbow, then life will be good.
then I'll be happy.
I'll have this, like I want to get this, or I want to get the most out of myself. I want to achieve, like I want to be that opera singer. I want to, I want to become something. The thought of becoming, and sort of why that was there for me. Um, I've contemplated that one quite a bit. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I think that the suffering is for sure there. I mean, anything that it's all impermanent, So it's like you can get to whatever you achieve in life, and the thrill of it probably won't last. And then, you know, you're kind of doing that thing over and over again. And then if you really kind of go up long term, it's like, yeah, I'm going to do this all the time, and then I'm going to die. Or I used to see people at the law firm I worked at, and they'd start just freaking out over stuff and all the pressure, and the way people scream at each other and treat each other like shit, and I mean, you ever notice how, I'm talking about myself too, people are very quick to get angry. Like they scream at a waiter if the waiter doesn't bring them their food fast enough, stuff like that, that's all people letting out that anger. Like, why,
Suffering.
why? Yeah,
They're suffering.
why are we doing that? I remember I was watching football this past season, and some guy dropped a pass in the end zone, and Twitter went nuts. Like, this guy's a piece of shit, blah, 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 blah. It's like, wow. Like, literally, it was trending. People just talking about this. The guy dropped the football in the end zone, right? In an invented game called football. It's an invention. It's a human conceptual invention, that we make important, but think about that. Like, there's something going on there, that why am I so unhappy that if some athlete doesn't hit a home run and win the game, that I'm flipping out and going nuts and punching a hole through a wall? Oh, but my life's fantastic. I'm happy, So sure, I think it's tough to get really honest with yourself and just about like what life's all about and contemplate it. And I don't know, I do that, you do that, but that's what I got to say on that subject, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you were talking about like that wanting to become or wanting to get, and that's like the craving, right? The craving, that condition, like there's always that little craving of like, if like it was just a little bit cooler, if it was just a little bit warmer, or if I could just have another piece of chocolate cake, then I would be satisfied. Or whatever, if I just got a little more views on my video or on my song, there's just always that like pervasive little thing that's, that's the self, that's the ego, that's what the ego does. It just is always looking, it's always seeking, I don't know for what, to perpetuate its own illusion. But yeah, there was a lot of other
Well, I
issues.
was going to say, it's interesting, thinking about why, I mean, that's, I remember in Daniel Ingham's book, actually, he writes in one of his chapters, I forget exactly what he said. And sorry, Daniel, I don't want to misquote you if this ever, but he basically says that like, if you could realize like what it is that starts this wanting in the first place, you would be highly realized, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember something like that. Yeah.
Because if you think about it, we're all in this kind of like very vulnerable position. Like, once when you talk about why, we're all in a very vulnerable position. Here's little me, right? And here's the whole world. That's not me. No, and I'm gonna die. And I'm very vulnerable to somehow deep down inside, I know that I'm very vulnerable to death and I'm going to die. And what was the also thing I was to realize? So I'm vulnerable, gonna die, and so yes, like what starting from that truth, you know, it's like, oh, I want more, I want a better position, I want more stuff, you know, it's survival, you know. And the thing about survival, and actually Peter Ralston writes about this, is like you're playing a game that you're going to lose because one day you'll die, you know? So it's like when you're trying to survive better, you know, which is kind of where the domain of this falls into. Like, oh my, I want this, I want that, I want pleasure, I don't want pain, you know, I want to run for this, I want to go towards that, all this stuff. He calls it kind of cheese chasing, like a hamster on a wheel that's chasing a cheese that he'll never obtain, or your unobtainable survival agenda, or things like that. He's actually fabulous, in my opinion, on this stuff to really contemplate what he writes. You know, but it's like, think about that. You know, as a human being, you're playing a game that you're going to fail. No matter how much you succeed, you're going to fail. You know, like that's an existential bind.
Yeah, if you're playing the finite game, if you're playing the game of the ego, as long as
Yeah,
you're playing if that game, then
but you're going to try to survive, and what even you know even and this goes even to you know even if you get beyond the ego. I mean, just the act of me holding this water bottle and me and you. I mean, this is all survival at work here. Um, so you know, it's it's really yeah. I mean, he does great work on this, but like yeah, I think it's really true that I mean, and that's why you know you start to get into I think spiritual practices because it's sort of like okay, how am I going to get myself out of this? You know, what is the way out of what's the way out of this situation? You know, seriously, like what is the way out of this situation? Um, of why I'm suffering. I mean, and you know, yeah, I mean that's I think it's one of the biggest questions a human being can ask themselves. And it's a very difficult question because I think that, you know, it leads to a lot of uncomfortable truths. And I think that the one thing I've always tried to do since I started this process, and it's hard, is be honest, you know, be honest with myself, whether I'm like meditating or whatever a spiritual attainment I have, like be honest about what my experience is actually like, you know? Um, for example, you know, there are a lot of people that say, oh, well, the world is all one. You know, the world is one. We're all in this together. The world is one, right? But the thing is, I was talking about this with my friend the other day, like, if you actually experience the world as one, you know, you wouldn't be because you're a separate self like looking at the world. So the subject is looking at the object, saying it's one, but that's not one, right? So, and that's what I mean by being honest about my experience and like what are my real motivations, you know, when I go cheese chasing and I think the next accomplishment will solve this or you know what's actually going on and getting honest with myself, not caring if what's going to happen is going to hurt me, because the truth might actually be uncomfortable, you know. Um, and I think that process of honesty and looking at your reality in, you know, when using some of these spiritual practices, I think is very, very helpful. Um, yeah. So, I mean, you got anything to say about that?
Yeah, I'm I'm gonna be honest. There's some construction going on right by the side of the house, and I was hoping that it would be over by the time that we were sitting down to have this talk, and it's still going on. So I hope that it's not too
I don't hear
disruptive.
it.
Okay, cool. Because it's like it's in the back of my mind, and I'm just like, oh, I'm getting a little triggered right now, live. And I'm just being honest. Um, yeah, there's so many like things that I want to talk about, and like you know, I definitely want to get to psychedelics, but
Yeah.
before that, I want to what's really interesting to me is about your friend. So I think about this a lot, about how in my own life, like how I grew up, like how it was for me growing up in Brooklyn. You know, and I'm sure it's like, you know, it's like this to some degree pretty much anywhere, but in Brooklyn it really was about like building your ego up, and like my just kind of how I experienced, like my family was very loving, and I think they kind of like maybe a little too loving, just like kind of like, you know, prop me up a little too much maybe. And then when I kind of went into school and then like into the real world, you know, I experienced not everybody loved me the same way. So that kind of made me harden up. And it was like, oh, like you know, I experienced some bullying, and I experienced like not fitting in. Also, I was an immigrant in this country. So English was my second language. And when I transferred schools in elementary school, like there was pretty much nobody. I'm originally from Ukraine, so I spoke Russian, and there was really nobody in the school like that was Russian. Most of the kids were like Italian American or whatever. They were just more Americanized. So like I got made fun of for my accent for a little while, and just going through that like really um kind of hardened me up. It was like I had to develop a strategy of like, okay, how am I going to get people to like me, right? I have to become cool. And how am I going to get people to not mess with me? Oh, I have to get tough, or I have to get strong. So that was like my strategy. I got to become cool and tough and strong. Like that's what I have to do. And like that's, you know, the working out and bodybuilding, like I got into that, and then I got into like music. Like those were my two things. And really like living, like coming back to living in Brooklyn and growing up in Brooklyn, like it really was this kind of, you know, that's just how it was. It just, that's my experience. It was like everything built up your ego. It's like people were constantly testing you and trying to, you know, like you kind of had to pretend a little. You had to pretend you were a little bigger. You had to puff your chest out a little bit. Like that was my experience. And I never really had any like spiritual mentors or a spiritual community. And like that's my whole life, is just the ego was getting propped up. And the more that it was getting challenged or attacked, it's like, all right, I'm going to make it stronger. I'm going to build my armor up even more. And that kept happening, you know, throughout my whole life. And while I was doing the music thing, until I really like, you know, had kind of this existential crisis that I had, and then did the psychedelics. And you know, I was in an environment that was completely different. I was in a space that was in completely different, and it was vulnerable, and it was heart opening. And this was in particular, this was when I did ayahuasca,
Yeah.
because that it was like a ceremony space, and the way the shaman held the space and all the people in the space, and just the kind of culture and environment that it was just like, whoa. Because I didn't really experience that. It was every environment I was in, it was like, no, you actually have to do the opposite. You got to harden up. You can't share. You can't reveal your weakness. You can't cry. You can't do any of those things. So like, I just find it kind of amazing that maybe this also wasn't like when you were really young, but you've known this person, the other opera singer that you mentioned before, and like, and he's from your experience, he's highly realized. So like that's such a blessing. Like I wonder how that's impacted you, and like to have somebody like that,
Yeah.
because that's one thing where I'm like, I wish I would have had like a spiritual teacher or a spiritual mentor or somebody that was like super into this stuff around me, kind of checking me like, oh, you really think you want these things? You really think that's your dream? You really think that's your mission? Like, poking like in a skillful, gentle way to kind
Yeah.
of make me question things.
Yeah. No, I was lucky. Like, my dad was always kind of a outside the box kind of thinker. Like, you know, don't be stay open minded. So I always was doing that, and I read a lot of authors that influenced me too, even in many other ways. When not assuming that the way sort of culture has says your life should go is the way it would go, but yeah, I got really lucky. I think I was a person that shared things pretty naturally, um, and I just got really lucky to have this person come into my life because, I mean, it was like talking to a Zen master every day. You know, it was really, really. I mean, and you can learn a lot by really listening. I mean, not by really listening. Because meditation and spirituality is very experience. We were talking about experience, direct experience and not concept. But it's sort of like playing sports where somebody says, okay, Adam, you got to hit the baseball like this. And then I got to take what they say and be like, okay, what do they mean? Like, how do I have to shift my experience so that when I swing a baseball bat, that happens? Where actually, I think being a high level athlete helps me to meditate, because I think there are similarities, uh, for sure, between what an athlete does, even a high level singer does, and meditation. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's important to have mentors in your life. I think people get really lucky. I think, I was always trying to look for them. Um, but at the same time, I think that could be a trap too, where it's like, oh, I need someone else to do blah blah blah, and ultimately, I think you got to be able to stand on your own 2 feet as well, because it's your experience that matters, and at least that's what I've found, and I think you got to be kind of, and that's actually where I'm at right now, is just, you know, things come full circle where I went down the spiritual path and, had a lot of openings and incredible life-changing stuff. But now it's like, I kind of realized in the last few months, like, wait a second, like this career stuff or my life, my everyday life, my marriage, my family, what I'm doing for work, what that means to me. It's like, oh, you know, there's work to be done there too. If I'm really going to be in alignment, and I've got to be honest with myself, and I can't use, I guess maybe what Ken Wilber calls spiritual bypassing, well, this is what's ultimately true, so I can ignore this, and it's like looking maybe back at some of the things that I've done in my life when I've gone from baseball to opera to lawyer, and maybe looking at how, okay, some of that was good, but maybe there was some dysfunction going on there too. Like maybe there was some immaturity. Maybe, right? I need to really fully accept my own mortality, right? And look at my career as something where it's not about something where I'm sort of trying to self-substantiate myself or get somewhere, but something that I'm going to plod along and do, take more of a long-term view, and do something that really contributes, and also realize if I do have desires, if I do want to do something and I do want to make something happen, that's not a bad thing. It's like, I was once talking to Frank Yang, and he said, like, don't even resist resistance. So it's like, it's kind of just like, hey, I am a pretty driven guy, right? I do like doing a bunch of different things. And I'm not going to fight that, but I'm going to use the insights, right, in order to sort of clean up a little bit and be honest about my life, and then move forward in a more healthy manner, in a way that, you know, that includes everything, you know, because we'll talk about like 5-MeO and psychedelics or whatever, but you know, my dad said something to me the other day about, he was talking about some people, he's like, they love humanity but they hate people, you know. And it's sort of like, a person maybe can be like, well, I'm so realized and it's all about love and blah blah blah, but meanwhile they treat their employee like shit, you know, or they're not, or they, you know, or they, you know, or they were mean to the waiter that didn't, that brought them the wrong meal when they were hungry, you know. So it's like, I look, that's really important to me in my practice, to like look at that stuff, like how am I actually acting, you know. I am getting angry, you know. I do get frustrated, I do have desires, like these are facts of things that occur, you know, that are real for me, and I can't run from them, you know. Ultimately I can't run from them, because the truth is that these things aren't separate, right? These things really aren't separate.
Yeah, this was coming up for me before, and then it left. But I was just remembering what Ram Dass used to say, that his guru used to tell him, Ram Dass, love everyone and tell the truth. And then Ram Dass would say, he's like, I want to tell the truth, but I don't love everyone. You know, and it was just like him realizing, like, yeah, like I want to be there, but the truth of the matter right now, in this moment, actually, this person's really annoying me. Like I'm irritated.
Yeah.
And like that, like just being like, that's coming back to the honesty thing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I'm hearing you say, and I feel like this, I feel this sense from you. There's actually somebody else that I'm gonna probably have on a podcast that I also have like this sense, and it's like this polarity of greatness and wholeness that like it pops up for me, and like I feel that's some of like your experience, or like some of your story, like that's what it resembles for me. It's like wanting greatness and then going for greatness, and then like, oh, like that's cool, but like actually what about wholeness? um you know, and I'm not sure if you could have both, like, or like if, you know, you have to, you sacrifice some wholeness for greatness, like what we deem greatness, at least like how we, what we consider greatness. Like when
Right.
I think about greatness, you know, the example I like to give is like the three Mikes, you know, the Michael Jordan, Mike Tyson, Michael Jackson, like those, you know, people consider those greats, like those are three greats in their respective fields, whether it's basketball, boxing, or singing. And then you look at their lives and it's just like, whoa, like a lot of heavy stuff, a lot of like imbalances, um you know. And that, I don't know if that's always the case, you know, like from my understanding, like LeBron's like a very balanced or healthy kind of guy. I don't know him personally, but yeah, that I'm like also curious about that, like that relationship between greatness and wholeness, because I feel like that would come up a lot in me. And even like you saying, oh, you know, maybe I could have tried a little more, you know, because I think about people that I know that were also pursuing rap, and like one person in particular I know actually made it fairly far with it, you know. And I'm like, well, maybe he was just like more extreme with it. He was just like, yo, I don't care. This is what I'm doing. I don't care how much I suffer. I don't care how many relationships I have to go, you know, cut off. I don't care how many friends I have to cipher through. Like I'm making it. And like, I don't know if like, oh, I just didn't have the will, the courage, or whatever it was, or I was too comfortable. I don't know. Maybe that's the case. Because I don't want to like spin it like, oh, I just realized that life is suffering and that I didn't really want, you know, the sour grapes thing. But like
Yeah.
I go back and forth with that, like,
I do the
oh,
same thing, man, because, you know, when I think about opera, for example, you know, it's like I had messed up my voice a little bit and done some things, but it's like, honestly, I was scared of the uncertainty. You know, I was scared. I didn't quite, you know, it's like, if I'm really being honest, it's like I could easily, that's what I said in the beginning about stories. You know, it's like whenever something happens, we don't even know why things happen. You know, things happen, and then after the fact, we give them reasons. You know, I think that's pretty interesting. But there are so many reasons why something happens. You know, it's actually infinite. We can't possibly grasp it. So we construct stories like, this is why this happened. Here, you know, here's this. I was scared, and then this. Maybe I want something else. You know, it's just a bunch of. It's really just a bunch of conceptualizations, right? Um, and and I think that one can see it both ways. Like, oh, it's like the other day I was like thinking about um, you know, quitting on something, and I was like, oh, I realized, like, you know what? I get frustrated after I fail, and I want to move on, you know, because I'm scared. I'm scared of really being vulnerable like that, or there's something that's going on. My second grade teacher told my mom something similar, but and I know that's there. So it's like, that's why, you know, I don't judge people like, you know, let's say someone like Michael Jordan or someone that's really successful at something. Oh, well, they're just, you know, spiritually undeveloped and blah, 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 blah. So they're just going after whatever, you know, but yeah, maybe that's there. But also there are things about them that are really admirable. Like, wow, that guy has insane persistence. Like, he has a lot of maybe the ability to be, which I think is actually, you mentioned something that I've always kind of admired in people. Like, hey, this is what I like to do. I'm going to do this, you know, whether I become majorly successful at it or whether I just become mediocre and always struggle, it's like, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. And that's it. You know, that there's something admirable about that. You know, um, that someone makes a decision and commits. You know, that there's something admirable there. You know, and maybe the person, you know, and it's like, because we're all just very, very different, and ultimately I think one needs to accept themselves for actually what they are now. And I bring it back to Peter Ralston. He has a video on YouTube, and he's like, if you want to change, do one thing. And the one thing he mentioned is completely be as you are. Like, if you want to get better, get so honest, like, really be as you are. If you're scared, be scared. You know, if you're don't try to change it. You know, don't try to change it. Be what you are. And I really, that's something that I kind of, as a person that was always like on the, okay, I want to explore, I want to see how I can get better, blah, 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 blah. On the other hand, I had to do that. Like, oh, can I just really just be where I am right now completely? You know, just be as I am and accept it. Really accept it. Because something happens there. It's like, no, I want it. No, you got to accept it. And there's a stillness that happens there, you know, a real stillness that happens in just accepting reality as it presents itself now without trying to change anything. And I mean, really doing it. Really doing it. And you know what I found? This is my experience. and maybe this is another story, but it's like the more I can do that, the more I can face my relative life issues with more honesty, power, and effectiveness. And just be honest with my life, you know? And when you talk about greatness and wholeness, it's like greatness without wholeness is a very, first of all, greatness is very relative. You know, I think you've got to be really honest with yourself and do what, you know, and go from there. But see, for me, wholeness wholeness really includes a healthy ego, you know, a really healthy way of interacting with other people and what I want to accomplish, and, you know, things I want to do with my life, you know, and how I want to build it. Like, that's part of wholeness. So yes, if I think if one just goes after it in maybe like a purely spiral dynamic, stage orange, whatever, type of a way, and it's like, well, I just want to be the best and I want to push everybody down, you know, or whatever, that's going to get really bad. But it's like, it's about being good so that you can do good, and find, and by healthily expressing something, find where you fit in with the whole, right? You see, that's where I feel like the greatness, and or what meant for the greatness and the wholeness intermixes. And I think that that's where I've seen people that, you know, seem to be living happy lives are able to find a place like that. And it might take a lot of work, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, several things came up. Like, one of them was, oh, it's hard to have a healthy ego, you know, like when you're trying to be great. And I guess maybe Mike Tyson's an extreme example, but I bring him up also because he has the similarity of Toad, which I kind of want to go into.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you know, I've heard this before, and there's something about it that kind of resonates. Like, oh, it's more important to be good than it is to be great. Like, there seems like there's something different about goodness and greatness, at least how I conceptualize it. And then also, kind of the other parallels that I see between you know, wholeness is like the whole, and then greatness is like the part, right? It's like, I'm gonna kind of say no to everything else so I can get really good at this one thing, so I could become great at this one thing. And then what was the other piece that I was looking for? The other piece is like, oh, becoming a specialist or being a generalist. Like, being a generalist is kind of more taking a holistic frame. It's like, oh, I'm actually interested in everything, and I kind of want to be good at, you know, I want to have like all these different tools. And then when you become a specialist, you kind of, you cut things off, you make a decision, you make a commitment, you sacrifice things.
Yeah.
And I think we need both. But I do think that, and this is when we were talking about what greatness is, I think our society and our culture really, it's more impressed with the specialist, and it pays the specialist better. And like, that's where everything, like kind of all the attention goes. And like, I think there's definitely something important about leaning into that polarity of being the specialist, playing, like stepping into a strong role of playing a certain part. But then I do feel like our society kind of neglects the more whole, more generalist, holistic kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. I suffered a lot because, like, hey, I want to accomplish something. I want to prove myself. Like, oh man, if I become a Major League Baseball player, the girls will love me. You know, I'll be able to do this. I'm going to do that. I'll be able to resolve my insecurities. You know, all that stuff. You know, and it really goes back to, you know, self-protection and fear, and Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I remember reading a book by Nassim Taleb, and he was like, specialization is for ants. Like you're a human being. But yeah, I mean, I think it's balanced, but I think it's also like, you know, within the right specialization, there's a lot of wiggle room too. And this is also to do with meditation, right? It's like, even, you could drill into a sensation almost infinitely, and break it down and break it down and break it down and break it down. So it's like the more you get to know something, the more you realize is that actual thing that you viewed as very, very limited is actually kind of not really that limited at all. On the other side of that, it's kind of like an hourglass, right? It's like you narrow yourself, but then you go through the middle, and then you it might be painful, and then you kind of come out the other end, and there's more optionality. You've got things like mastery and what you learn about yourself as a person by trying to, okay, I'm like this now, like I want to get here, what are things that I need to do in order to do that, in order to bridge that gap, and there's self-adjusting that has to happen. It happened to me when I was playing baseball. It's like, how I want to achieve this, but like I can't do it now. How do I do it? Well, I'm gonna have to take this thing and find a way to and be flexible with myself, so that because so that I can become that person that's better, and there's something in that about sort of the nature of who we are and our ability to change and be flexible, right? Because we're not these sort of solid entities. We can change a lot more than we can. At least that's my experience. And that's actually kind of, if you want to get into psychedelics, that's what psychedelics really 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 brought home for me as well.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that because we have a lot of commonalities, I feel, and this is just another one, not just psychedelics, but in particular, um, toad venom, 5-MeO DMT, and I actually have a video on my channel, and I've spoken about this a lot openly, and wrote a blog about it, and it's actually been over 4 years since I've done that, but to me, that's the most profound psychedelic I've ever done. Those experiences that I had, I've used it, I think 3 times, but those experiences were just complete ego dissolution, complete no going back. What Daniel Ingram, I think, called the arising and passing away. I think that's kind of what the shift that happened for me. It was like, oh, the first time I did it, it was like in the actual experience, like, oh shit, I'm on this spiritual journey, and there was just this sense of, oh, you can't go back. Oh shit. And like profound openings for me, right?
Yeah.
And then you kind of shared a little bit, and I know different people who've had this experience, and it's always interesting to kind of have this experience and then reflect back and then try to put the ineffable into words, because whatever the hell whatever you say about it isn't quite what it is. That's what I recognize, especially with Toad, because you're not retaining probably, if you retain 5% of that experience, that's amazing. Like that's already a lot of insight. But a lot of what you shared with your experience, I think mapped a lot with mine.
Yeah.
So maybe you could kind of talk a little bit more about that, because
Sure. I
that's
mean, yeah. I mean, I guess the difference between me and you is like I felt like I hit the you know irreversible, I'm on the spiritual path thing, with when I started to microdose, uh, you know, LSD a little bit, and mushrooms. And I think the one thing I'd say before I get into that is, I think there's a lot of controversy around psychedelics still. Like, you have people like Leo Gura out there who like is a huge proponent. A lot of people are critics, and you know, can it get you enlightened or whatever? stuff like that. And the way I guess I've always approached it is, I think with this stuff, it's really important to really be open with it, but also to be very grounded. I think that it's easy with any of this stuff, even meditation, to kind of fly off the beaten path with it, and I think it's really important to be grounded, to be open and grounded, and I also think it's really important to have an actual practice off the psychedelics. It's like I would take psychedelics, yes, but I also was meditating 2 hours a day, not on psychedelics. I was really sitting there and doing it as much as I possibly can. My wife could tell you, after work, I'd go out in the garage, I'd sit. I'd really sit. I remember one time, after reading Daniel Ingham's book and talking and learning about concentration when I first started, I would work when I was working as a lawyer from 9 to 5. I would literally every half hour, I would sit on my cushion for 5 minutes and concentrate on my breath. And I would do that every day throughout the day for a half an hour, every half hour, and I did that for a long time because I knew it's like, if I can concentrate, really do it for 5 minutes, I could really do that. Then, so it's like I was really building a practice. What I would say psychedelics did for me is I began to notice, before I get to 5-MeO, I began to notice that I would be on a psychedelic and I would notice like what was happening in my experience, and I would have these like huge openings where something would open up, and what I really think is happening is like, when I was staring at the fly for an hour, you're kind of in a state of samadhi, where you're just like, the thoughts just vanish and you're just boom, right? And I started to notice what was happening. And what I began realizing is like, okay, if I can do this on a psychedelic, why can't I do it off a psychedelic? In other words, why can't I shift, why can't I get there just, obviously my brain, my body, mind is capable of doing this. Yes, I'm aided by a little drug, but I'm capable of it. If I'm capable of it, then why don't I do it on my own? And over time, actually what I found was that what I was starting to get on mushrooms and LSD when I would do it started to actually kind of mesh with my meditation, where there wasn't so much of a difference anymore. And I think that could be, for me, that was very impactful, because I also didn't have a chance to go on a 10-day retreat, do something where I could just kind of like get away from the world for a month and just go meditate, So I felt like these experiments with psychedelics along the way allowed me to accelerate my progress a little bit, and allow me to see some things that maybe I wouldn't have seen without it, and really sort of progress my meditation. So anyway, to get into the 5-MeO thing, I want to do it because I've heard a lot about it. And I would say, the best way I can describe it, I mean, if anybody ever listens to this video, I mean, Shinzen Young has a video that I sent you on what he calls the absolute witness. And he describes what this is, which is different from like the witness that normally people refer to in meditation, but the absolute witness. And his description of the absolute witness, I would say what he says in that video was exactly what my 5-MeO experience was. It's hard for me to call it a psychedelic because I wasn't there. They're like, in order for you to be tripping, you know, somebody's got to be there tripping, but I wasn't there, you know, I really wasn't there. And I remember the only little kind of memory I have of me being there is I remember kind of leaning back, you know, and I think I told you this, like, I felt a sense of absolute horror because like my whole world was getting just ripped away from me, you know? And apparently I screamed, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," like, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. And after that, I was gone, you know, but I was conscious, you know, like, so let's try to describe this. It was
consciousness
like,
was, you
yes,
weren't conscious, consciousness
correct,
was.
correct. Yes. Like, you know, when people say things like it is or it's ising, right? There was no time, there was no space, there was no me, there was no subject, there was no object. It was just like identityless, existence, you know, or just what is. I don't know. Like, you couldn't say I was existing or not existing. I mean, I came basically, you know, geez, this is hard to get
Beyond,
worse.
it was beyond existing or not existing, no?
Yes, like it's
beyond
sort of,
that
for me. And the thing is that I remember, so I do remember a little bit, and I remember that like I was laying in there, and like I was sort of in a void and everything was stripped away. But I remember like I was still experiencing some sort of little bit of suffering, you know, because you got to let go into it, which by the way is like not necessarily going to happen, because it scares I mean, it's really fucking scary, you know, at first, if you're not familiar with this type of stuff.
dude. I don't think I let go. I think it just it made me tap out, because I was especially the first time I did it, I was fighting that thing till the end, and then I just couldn't fight no more.
So yeah, I was laying there, and I remember like there was a little bit of suffering still there, but it was like the suffering of being a separate ego, like the existential suffering of me being Adam. And I remember just something inside me. It was like almost like, you know, I was gonna fall from the Empire State Building, and I was hanging on to a pole with one little finger, you know, and then all of a sudden I just let go. You know, I was just like, it was like, okay, I'm gonna die now. You know, it's okay, I'm gonna go away. You know, and I just let go. And when I let go, it was just poof, it just got, I was gone. You know? But in that is like, I want to say, like, you know, the ultimate reality, whatever that is, that created the Big Bang, you know, that the Big Bang happened in that. Because it's very easy to say, like, okay, you know, the Big Bang happened in me, or I did that, like sort of like ego project onto that state, you know? But all I can say is that it was like, I felt like I hit my head on the eternal gong. Like I went away, and it was like, you know, the I am that I am of the Bible. Like, you know, God, when Pharaoh asked me, who sent me, who should I tell him? And God says, tell him I am that I am. Like whatever there is that is, you know, the direct experience is whatever that is not separate from my own being. You know, I know that. Without making any ontological claims, without making anything about what that is. It's like, I went from feeling like I was this thing that's maybe separate in some way, to realizing that like that thing is also me, you know, like my very essence of whatever is showing up here is that, you know, and it is everything else. And it was the ultimate like trust, letting go, and oh my God, I'm okay. You know, and I remember like, you know, I think I told you, it really felt like my brain got shut down. Like you turn the computer off, you know, like shut down, and then boom, okay, then all, it's like all of a sudden I remember I heard like, you know, like shaking, like they were shaking, like the person with me was shaking some sort of instrument. All of a sudden, like sound, and then vision comes back, and you don't even know what you're looking at. It's like you're being born again, like a baby, you know, like all of a sudden it's like, you know, you're coming back online little by little by little, like, and then I would describe the computer getting rebooted, you know, but it's like in between the computer getting shut off and the computer getting turned back on, it's like you were eternity, you know, a complete selfless eternity, you know, in the fabric of reality, completely interwoven. And the knowledge of that, you know, when the mind comes back on, it's like, oh my God, I'm safe. Like, I'm okay. Like, I'm okay. And I think that this whole thing of suffering, you know, that we're going through in our lives, and wanting to get a better job, and, you know, kids and family and all this stuff, we're all trying to be okay. Like, because it's like, fuck, I'm going to die. I'm going to lose everything I care about. I'm going to lose my family, you know, my parents are going to die. You know, everything is going to get stripped away from me, from my little from Adam Unger, you know, and knowing that as an ego, how could you be okay? I mean, like, oh my God, that's the situation we're really all in together. And it was and it's very hard to live this, you know, and this is where the practice comes in. But it's like, I'm okay, you know, I'm okay. Like, oh my God, oh my God. That's where the God thing is, like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm okay. You know, it's like through the fire of hell, it's like, I'm okay. And maybe that's what Daniel Ingram was talking about, you know, when it's like, when you could come back and realize what's the thing that's driving you in the first place. And it's like, oh, like the thing I was always just looking for was like reality, was me. Like I felt like I finally looked at myself in the mirror, like saw what actually was, you know? And that's really scary and it's still scary for me as a person, you know? Like what actually was, you know, I was sitting in a sauna. I'm doing a like half hour in a sauna, you know? And I'm sitting there and I wanted to get out. And I said, oh, I'm staying in for another 10 minutes. And all of a sudden that survival thing started to come up in me. That same like where you feel like your life's under threat. And I started actually, nobody was in the sauna. And I started to sit in the sauna like, God help me, God help, like really, God help me. You know, help me. You know, this crisis, like, help me, I'm gonna die, help me. You know, I'm vulnerable, help me. You know, but it's like you realize that the God that you want to help you is also part of you. You know, but in order to get there, it's like you've got to really let go. You know, all that fear and all that conceptualization and man, it had a huge effect on me. Like after the experience, my body became more flexible. You know, I didn't talk about this, but part of what brought me to spirituality too is that I had a very bad a chronic pain issue, like my neck. I was in horrible pain working as a lawyer, you know, sitting behind my desk typing. That was horrible pain. And when I had this experience, it was like tension that was in my muscles from like playing baseball and striving and trying, like started to let go. You know, it's like I could never do half lotus, and all of a sudden I could do half lotus. You know, like I like my body relaxed. You know, and I began realizing when you talk about suffering, you know, how much as egos were, you know, holding on, defending ourselves in very subtle ways, very, very subtle. You know, trying to survive. And man, that brought a whole new dimension to my life, you know. But I think this is where groundedness comes in. Is it's easy to take an experience like that and be like, well, fuck, look at my life right now. Shit, I'm still working as a lawyer. It sucks. You know, I want to go escape. You know, like another duality gets created. My everyday life and my 5MEO life, or even my meditative life. Like, oh, I want to just go back and sit and get into a jhana, or I want to sit and meditate, you know, or do this or do that. And I always bring it down to like, what's happening now? You know, what's my life like now? Because if I'm not living it, you know, if I'm not actualizing it, if I'm not experiencing it directly right now, then it's just a memory, it's just a concept, you know? And then it's like some other ideal that I create that I now have to strive towards. And then now I'm starting the suffering all over again, right? So it's like, at some point, and I'm still learning how to do this, it's just to fucking stop. Just to stop. You know, just to stop. And I consider myself so lucky to have had all the opportunities. Look, we get to sit here and have this conversation. Holy shit, you know, what a fucking privilege. You know, I have a 8-month-old baby now, and you have 2 kids. He's just learning how to eat solid food. Do you realize what an accomplishment? When you watch a baby learn to eat solid food, I realize what a fucking accomplishment that is. Like just being able to eat solid food, being able to crawl, you know, learning how to say dada. Holy shit. Like we've all accomplished so much just by surviving, but we forget about it. We forget about all the things that we have, and it becomes about the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. But it's like, damn, I could stop right now. You know? Yeah, I still got to pay my bills, so there's that problem. But, you know, I really felt like that. I actually have had times in my life where where motivation or hunger has become actually like a little bit of a problem, because I'm actually just so happy and don't really need anything, that I've got to somehow now create some drama for myself to go out there and accomplish things, because I still need to live, and I want to buy a house, and I want to do all these things. But really, truthfully, you don't need all those things. But you know what? I think you got to the more I'm thinking about this stuff, it's like the more I got to be like, hey, Adam is going to live out his life, and Adam's going to do his thing. And I just got to be okay with it. I just got to be okay with it. Got to keep going. And as one of my good mentors, Ray Negron, who works in baseball. He's worked for the Indians and the Yankees. And I used to like when I was 13 years old, I used to say, Ray, what are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing tomorrow? And he used to tell me, shut the fuck up. It's one day at a time.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
That's my experience, But I think, you got, even after 5-MeO, I think you do the same thing. Like, you got to keep practice, sitting, and I've gotten more down a zazen and sitting path and getting into koans, but whatever. I think psychedelics are real, and I think that they can be real. I think it depends on the person. Like with all this stuff, it depends on the person. Even with meditation, it could depend on the person. Some people meditate, it's great for them. Some people meditate, they can have a psychotic episode in the middle of a retreat. I don't, who knows? But I think the most important thing is just to be honest with yourself, and continue to not know, and continue to realize that whatever that thing is that you're one with, that ultimate mystery, is, because knowing is finite. As soon as you know something, right, you've limited it, you've defined it, and so whatever can be known actually can't ultimately be true in the ultimate sense, because what's ultimately true can't be known. It can only be maybe you can be it or grasp it directly, but trying to know it, trying to pin it down, I don't know. I have my opinions on that, but
yeah, there's a lot of things that you said there that were interesting and that I could kind of go with also. And there was what I'm kind of interested about, and well, for you also, this experience is really young, so I'm curious, right? Because it's been a couple of months since you've done it, right? So like, I'm really curious to see like what transpires for you and how it unfolds. It also seems to me that you're kind of more grounded in your life right now than like I was when I did it. This was like 4 years ago, the last time I did it. So there was like a lot of difficulty integrating it. But what I do think there was a commonality is that with me and you, with this, was I also had a very dedicated daily meditation practice for several years before I did the Toad. And I think that when I listen to some people share their experience, I think that for some people, that is actually the difference, is that they didn't have the daily practice. And then it's so this ties right back into, for me, into Childas's book, The Mind Illuminated. And this is where he spoke about how the mind is actually a system of subminds. So there's different parts to the mind. And once you unify the mind, there stops being conflict. And that's when you have these ultimate realizations, or this ultimate realization. And I think part of what he says is part of retaining the insights, or gaining the insights, is the more of those parts and subminds are unified, the more you retain. So I'm wondering if that's actually what was happening, is because we've meditated, we've had this practice, we're actually able to maybe retain more of the experience or get a deeper insight. And then the other aspect, and this also goes back to the mind illuminated, is this is what I was super curious about, right? Because I'm like, okay, was this an experience of the arising and the passing away? But then the other thing is when I read about a cessation, and the cessation is, how do you explain a cessation? It is really what you said, like the way I understand it is your mind gets shut off, right? But it's not like you're going to sleep or going unconscious. It's something way more radical. It's like somebody unplugged the computer and somebody cut the tape out of the film, and then it restarts, and then you're like, whoa, what the hell was that? Like, and really after having these experiences and reading about what a cessation is, I was like, whoa, was that a cessation? Because it seemed like, and I've wrote about this on forums and people told me it wasn't. And I spoke to Daniel Ingram about this, and, we're kind of unsure. And then you brought up that maybe this was a cessation. I was like, oh, really? Like, and your experience seems to be very similar to mine. You said you spoke to Frank Yang, so that's what I was also thinking about after our conversation last time. Since Frank Yang he's a YouTuber, and he's somebody who's came out and very openly about his meditation claims, and he's claimed basically fourth path, like, which is like really high realization in on the meditative path. And I'm curious, and he's somebody also that he's also done the 5-MeO DMT. So maybe we need to talk to him and see what he says.
I think that would be fun. I mean, I've spoken to him. Yeah, I mean, I had my friend who I think had a cessation. He described it as kind of the same thing, like computer shuts down, comes back on. I don't know. Also, like, I think different traditions, like, when I think about Zen, right, and they talk about Kensho or Satori, I don't know if that's a cessation. Like, I don't know if they even view it in the same way. I don't know. This stuff is like so personal. All I can say is what I got out of it. I mean, do I think that it's more than the arising and passing away if I'm going to go classify it? Yes. Because not that somebody, that's just my experience, because I've kind of read about it and I've heard Daniel Ingram speak about it differently. And I've had those types of like experiences where, I had shifts like, oh my God, like now I'm seeing, things differently, or that going on the spiritual path. And it's just like, yeah, man, I wasn't there for this. Like, I really wasn't. I mean, I actually read Daniel's book about, I think he has a chapter called like, what the hell was that, or something like that in his book, and he's kind of like, if there was any bit of you there, it's not it. If there's any bit of time, it's not it. Now, if you ask me,
it's a little unclear, right? It's a little unclear.
If you ask me, right, was there any bit of me there? I got to start. If there was, it was like unnoticeable, or 1% or 2%, or something very. It's very hard to say. I think that I'd have to do it multiple times. I mean, what makes me think that, it's like, it wasn't only the going in, but the coming out, because when all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, like I'm hearing again. Oh my God, I'm seeing again, right? It's like hearing and seeing gone, thinking gone, So it's like, because notice, like, in order for it to come back online, it had to have been gone, So for sure, those things were gone. Hearing, thinking, seeing,
yes,
feeling, having a body, gone.
No space, no time.
Yeah, may it have been some sort of like eighth jhana, neither, like some deep eighth jhana of neither perception nor non-perception, where your body's completely gone, right? Like all that stuff, right? But then, you know, you talk about Frank Yang, you know, he talks about cessation as the ninth jhana. It's like you're in the eighth jhana, and it's like you let go, and it's like, boom, gone. And it doesn't have to last long either. At least that's my understanding. You know, you could have in time out here, it could be 5 seconds. You know, your cessation, how long it lasts. Certainly, it would have to be talked about. It would have to be done again. What I think is interesting about my experience is, like, I think from a cessation point of view, is Daniel Ingham talks about entering through the 3 doors. You can enter through the suffering door, you can enter through the no self door, or the impermanence door, right? And my experience was, whenever I talked about it, it's like that last little bit of myself, and then I let it go. It's like there was some unease or unrest or suffering that was still present. And it was like, when I really, like, poof, let all that go, it was like suffering for the first time in my life that I can remember. Like, suffering was just poof, gone. You know, it's like, maybe that sounds to me, if it is a cessation, like going through the suffering door or something like that.
Yeah, I guess
again, it depends. You know, it might be a combination of the psychedelic and then what your body mind does when you're on it,
which is going to be different for everybody. And like
different for everybody.
Yeah, because I was talking to Daniel about this, and that somebody was wanting to try to get him into doing the 5-MeO and actually do a study on him, put him in fMRI and compare that brain state, and then have him actually meditate and get to like a cessation or do these kind of things and see how they map. But then it's also like, you don't know, like one person can use it and their brain will go to, you know, completely different brain state or different experience than for another. But I don't know, it doesn't, I guess it doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of curious, because then I guess what really matters is how it changes your life. And I think for me, I don't think like after I did it, it was like, oh, there was no suffering. There was actually a whole new layer. There was new layers and flavors of suffering that I was like, oh my God, I was in dukkha for so deep, up to my knees, up to my waist, up to my neck in dukkha after these experiences. But then there was also something that was very illuminating. And now that it's been so many years to really sit with this experience and really integrate it and realize, like, you know, this is where it comes back to like the daily life, because this experience is so out there. And then you come back and you're like, okay, like you have this experience, like to me, it's like everything is love. It's like there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do, there's no one to be, like all is good, like everything is perfect. Like, you know, the ego is an illusion, and everything that we're chasing is an illusion. And underneath that, it's just pure love, you know. But then embodying that is like, whoa. And that's what I realized. Like this has actually been the longest that I haven't had a psychedelic trip. It's probably been like a year and a half since I started using psychedelics in like a conscious way. And I really realized it's like, you get, for me at least, I get a lot of similar messages, and it's usually about compassion. It's usually about love. It's usually about acceptance. And now I'm like, well, can I love this person while my ego is online? That's the work, because it's easy to do. It's a lot easier to do when the default mode network starts to shut down, and when the sense of self starts to recede, and you're like, oh, you know, your boundaries kind of start dissolving, and your heart starts to open, and you're just like, wow, I love everybody, I love everything. Like, I don't have no judgments. I have infinite compassion. It's like, how do I bring that? How do I do that while my ego, while Artem is fully online, and my sense of self, and me being here, you being there, is here? Can I love you and have that compassion
and functioning in the world, and, you know, and having a family and living in New York, which is a crazy fucking place to be.
Another thing we have in common.
Yeah, I mean, come on, like, you know, my experience even being a lawyer, man. I mean, shit, like these people are, I mean, God bless them. Some of them are just really intense, and all these details, and oh my God, we got to get this signed, and this is gonna happen, and blah 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 blah. Like amid all that just insanity, you know, because that's the fact of at least my life. It's like what I'm living, and I think that that's really the journey is, maybe in some way, it's like we live in a world of action. We live in a relative world. We live in a world of action. Whether you're enlightened or you're not or whatever, they're still interacting with other people. There's still survival happening. It's like, I don't know that many enlightened people that, just want to give up on life and, and die. It's like, I mean, that would be a pretty high, realization, just overcoming, like that old Zen story about the guy who conquers a monastery, like this old warrior kind of conquers a monastery. This is the story that I heard. And he goes and he kills everybody in the monastery, then goes up to the headmaster, and the headmaster is sitting in the chair, and the warrior goes to him. He goes, "Why are you just sitting there? Don't you realize that I could kill you in a second?" And I think the Zen monk looks at him and goes, "Don't you realize I can just die in a second?" Something like that. Like he just did, like something like that. Like, that's wow. Like really, actually in your everyday life, sort of getting to that level of actualization of this stuff, that's pretty tough. But there could also be, as Ken Wilber points out, you could have somebody like that who's, dysfunctional, possibly in other ways, lower down on the spectrum. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the self could fall away, and there doesn't have to be a sense of a doer, but the doing can still happen. And like the quote, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water.
Yeah.
Like after enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Like the things that need to get done are still going to get done. The vessel, the universe pouring through the vessel, and the vessel doing what it has to do. It's still like, I don't know, like there's something about like that resonates to me more than becoming completely a renunciate and just like sitting in the monastery and not doing anything. Even though that path is also fascinating to me, and it's like that's interesting. It would be cool to, if I could live parallel lives and just be in a monastery. But even if you're in a monastery, that doesn't mean that you're not doing things. That means you're not impacting the world, or you're not contributing somehow or giving back. It doesn't mean you're just sitting in eternal meditation and in one spot and people are feeding you grapes to keep you alive.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's just maybe accepting your own journey, right? And I don't have all the answers, but yeah, whatever's going to happen in your life is going to happen, I think. And it's just yeah, I mean, I agree. I think you have to, well, you don't have to do anything, but yeah, it's just kind of like continuing to live out this life and learn what you can learn, and act and play out whatever's going to play out. I think but I think because that's where life is, right? It's in the action. It's in the sitting down and actually talking. We could theorize about talking all we want, but it's like the actual doing of it. And I read a pretty cool Zen parable the other day. It was about a guy who loves dragons, and he he paints dragons, and he has his house in the shape of a dragon, and he does, dragon origami, dresses up as a dragon. And then it says that a real dragon one day is flying over and sees a house that's built to look like a dragon. And and so the dragon says, oh, that guy would probably love to meet me. And so the dragon flies down and knocks on the guy's door. And when the guy opens the door, he goes, ah, runs away. And the parable goes like, we all love the paper dragons in our lives, but when we have to face the real dragon, is when we kind of decide. So it's like we all have these concepts and these fantasies about how my life will go and what Adam will do and all this sort of stuff like that, and it's kind of like your life though is lived out in reality, in facing the real dragon, that's in front of you. And I think that healthy spirituality actually, not only helps you to transcend, but to actually accept what is and sort of face that real dragon that is sort of your life and live it in a way that's hopefully in a way that grows and and is rewarding and contributes and is a life well lived, and sort of letting the universe or letting God work through you in the way it intends without you getting in the way too much, because that's actually real. When you talk about like real commitment to something, it's like a lot of time that fear comes up about, oh man, I'm scared to do that. But it's like you got to give that up and sometimes trust, and God or the universe or whatever it is that's working through you, that's looking through your eyes, is going to say, man, you got to go in that direction, and sometimes like a 5-MeO experience, you need to jump off the cliff and build your wings on the way down.
Yeah, and then realize there's no ground anyway. So
there you go.
Yeah, man, it's been fascinating conversation, just like the first time. And
thank you, Artem.
I got 2 little monkeys that are about to come home, so I gotta play my role as a zookeeper over here. Yeah, there was other things that I wanted to speak about, but I think maybe it's good to just kind of leave it open.
Yeah,
because then we'll have more.
No, sorry, I think we ended on a great note. Like we kind of came full circle back to back to psychedelics and back to a very grounded place. So I think we actually it ended perfectly.
Yeah, man, awesome. Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on here and having this talk with you, and I will do it again for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you, man. Have a good one.
Yeah, all the best, brother.
See you later. Bye.